My name is Joshua Stanton-Savitz, and today I'll be talking a little bit about the Stanford Prison Experiment. So, here's my presentation. All right. So, I'm going to be talking about the Stanford Prison Experiment. I'll be talking about the man who ran the experiment by the name of Philip Zimbardo, a little bit about the experiment, a reflection, and a comparison of guards versus the inmates. So this experiment took place at Stanford University in the basement of the psychology building where there was a Stanford County prison set up. Philip Zimbardo was a famous Stanford professor that taught at Stanford until the early 2000s. He won many achievements, including the Lifetime Achievement Award by the American Psychology Association, and was the leader of the American Psychology Association for a long time. His most well-known experiment was the Stanford Prison Experiment, conducted in August of 1971. This experiment started by posting a local ad in the newspaper recruiting volunteers. First day, these volunteers were interviewed and chosen. They were weeded out to ensure no one had standing psychological issues, and they were in physical means to be in the mock prison. They were told to stay in their homes, and local police came, which they didn't know was going to happen, and arrested them in front of neighbors, in front of a lot of people. They were fingerprinted, photographed, put in a cell, strip searched, given a uniform, all their clothes and valuables were taken away, and it started off tough. They chose 24 volunteers, 12 of them were chosen as guards, and the other 12 were the ones that were being arrested, and those were the prisoners. So day one went pretty smoothly in terms of how everything went about and getting them into the basement of the psychology building. Day two is when things started causing problems. The first day in prison, everyone saw it as a job and no one thought it would be taken so seriously until day two, when there was a surprise of rebellion. This really showed that there was unity among the prisoners. A lot of prisoners kind of ganged up against the guards. They barricaded the doors and didn't allow the guards to open them. Inmates in the cells that were not barricaded, because there were two other cells, they were being punished by the guards at this point to do physical punishment, being, stripping down. The guards were yelling at them, and the guards had to call backup. They had all 12 guards there at this point, and all 12 prisoners. And this leaves a big open question in my mind among the guards. If you have 12 guards, they can control 12 prisoners. But how could you only use 2 or 3 guards to control 12 prisoners? And this is a big question of control that we'll see later in the experiment, where the guards actually start gaining control by always doing counts with the inmates, never showing their bright side. It's always grueling exercises, grueling tasks, always yelling, and not a very nice place to be. So day 3 was probably the most smooth day that went along. It was visitation day for the inmates. The loved ones of the inmates came in. The inmates were actually fed a nice meal the day of, and it was pretty smooth. It starts turning downhill once we get to day 4 and 5. One of the inmates was actually kicked out of the prison. He was displayed in this slide. He was kicked out of the prison because he led that other rebellion, prisoner 8612. He actually had to leave because he wasn't sane. And day 4 and 5, a new inmate came in who nearly immediately started a hunger strike. And this new inmate was brought in, didn't like the conditions, and he caused other inmates to gang up on him, which is very contrary to what we saw at the beginning when, we had one inmate starting a rebellion and others were unifying with him. Now we really see a comparison among the guards and the inmates. We see 3 different types of guards. We see the tough and fair guards, always mean face on, but they're fair with inmates. Then there's the guards that give little special favors. They'll give them a little, treat of a snack, or, lighten up on them a little bit. And the worst of the worst are these sadistic guards that will just, they always yell, always yelling at the inmates, always being tough, always making them do, punishment. And, on the other side, there's prisoners. We see, 4 prisoners had to leave because they couldn't emotionally handle the stress of this situation. Then we see the inmate at the beginning and the one who started the hunger strike, the rebellious inmates. And finally, we get the inmates that are just, honestly, they're just followers. They will do anything the guards tell them to do. They will do, whether it's, physical, whether it's yelling, whatever they're told to do, they'll do. Day 6, one of the graduate students pointed out a few flaws in this experiment, and that it had gone too far. The prisoners were being treated too harshly. The guards, the warden, and Zimbardo, who was acting as the superintendent, were too into their roles, and Zimbardo really had to step back. And once he stepped back, he realized that it had gone way too far. So he shut down the experiment. Although he shut down the experiment a week early, he saw the results that he wanted to see. He saw that there was a change in structure, and he saw them. He never expected to see them this fast. In only 6 days, he saw results that he didn't expect to see until 2 weeks. And even then, in 2 weeks, he didn't even necessarily expect to see them. So a little overview of this experiment. These inmates had to follow up for 10 years to make sure that they didn't have long-lasting effects on them. There's a big emotional mark on the guards, never thought that they could yell and be so mean to someone. And these inmates that were being yelled at, grueling punishments and everything. But when I look at this example, I really have to think, there are people in prison, these guys were in prison for 6 days. There are hundreds of people every day that go to prison that undergo similar punishments and treatments. And they're there for years and entire lives. And that's how we get the term hardened criminals, is when they're in this environment for so long. It really hardens them. The average prison sentence is 4.5 years. So a little summary, I talked about Philip Zimbardo, his role in this experiment, how he ran this experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, a little day-by-day overview, the overview of the experiment, and a little comparison of the guards versus inmates. Thank you so much, and I appreciate you listening to my presentation today.